Welcome to the Mixology Talk podcast. I'm Chris.
And I'm Julia, and we're the folks behind abarabove.com.
So I'm a former bartender and I guess the cocktail expert in this relationship here.
It's true, and I am I'm in charge of QA. Let's go with that. Chief Cocktail Taster. I'm also in charge of running all the boring back-of-house operations at A Bar Above, making sure our factories keep making great barware and that they get into your hands.
Yeah, and so together we run the Silly Podcast, also our website and Facebook groups, A Bar Above, and the Craft Cocktail Club on Facebook.
Check us out.
This is episode number 188 of the Mixology Talk podcast. And today we're going to be talking about DIY solutions or some cheaper ways to make an otherwise very expensive hobby more approachable. So that's what we're talking about today, budget cocktails.
Let's save some money, shall we? So as we all know, well, if you're watching episode 188 of a nerdy mixology podcast, you're probably deep in this bank account wise.
Right.
This is an expensive hobby. It is super, super expensive. I don't even want to look behind me and think about what this has cost us.
It's called a write-off.
I wish. A lot of it, not so much. But when you think about craft cocktails, unfortunately, it's a really expensive hobby. And so this is something that comes up over and over and over again. We hear a lot from our audience and from our listeners and the folks in our Facebook group about how that's one of the biggest challenges about the mixology craft cocktail hobby. So today we thought we'd take a little bit of time to drill into ways to save money.
Yeah, and you actually asked the Craft Cocktail Club ways they make this expensive hobby cheaper, and they had some fantastic suggestions. So we're going to go over that a little bit and go in a little bit more detail on each kind of category. So
definitely, yeah. I crowdsourced this post for sure. Obviously, we had some of our own suggestions, but the Craft Cocktail Club definitely came through with some amazing and really creative ideas for things that you can do to save a lot of money behind the bar.
Yeah, so the first one that kind of came up, and I think this is probably the most obvious to people, is making your own ingredients. And this kind of shows itself in a couple different ways. Obviously, simple syrups and infused syrups, syrups with a bunch of flavor.
Let's go ahead and start with simple syrup, though. Seriously, don't buy it.
Don't ever buy simple syrup from the store. It's literally 1 part sugar to 1 part water. That's it.
It's like the cheapest, easiest thing you could possibly make.
Right.
So if you take one thing away from this podcast,
don't ever buy simple syrup.
That'll save you like $5 a month there. Like, you're welcome.
Right.
Podcast has paid for itself. It's free, so I guess it paid for itself already. But seriously, simple syrup is just the beginning, right? There's so many places you can go from there. Flavored syrups is a fantastic thing you can do. You can start looking into things like infusions.
Yep.
A lot of liqueurs, a lot of fancy syrups, things like that, are really very doable to make yourself. And if you make them yourself, you have a couple benefits. Obviously, it's just cheaper. But secondly, you can also do things like make smaller quantities. I don't know about you, but I don't need 3 gallons of creme de violette. I mean, let's be honest, I really do. But
I think, this is a good point, though. I mean, if you just start with like a base spirit and simple syrup, I mean, right there, if you add some bitters in there, that's an old-fashioned. And you can play with the flavor profile of that simple syrup all day long. There's so many different avenues you can take there. Without kind of getting too complicated and adding acids in there and amaros and, going all fancy. If you just stick with the simple things, you're going to really be able to focus and master on flavor. And that's really, really a great place to start from, is developing flavor and recipes without going too crazy on expense.
Now, what would you say about liqueurs? I know liqueurs, amaros, things like that, are modifiers, essentially, are, in my opinion, the easiest way to break the bank behind the bar. You have a recipe and it says you need green chartreuse, so you have to go buy a bottle of green chartreuse, and then you use this much of it, and now you have a nice bottle of green chartreuse on your bar, and your bank account is $60 lighter. That adds up.
Yeah,
right?
It does.
Do that a few more times, and it's going to hurt.
And I think that is definitely something we're going to talk about here in a second when we talk about bottle sizes. But I think that, starting out with simple cocktails like a sour and old-fashioned stuff and using just base ingredients as your starting point is going to be really great, because then you're going to start to understand what you like, the styles of cocktails you want. And then as you slowly start to develop and start to explore this, because who knows, you may not like it in 6 months. So starting somewhere very simple and then adding, let's say you start with one drink and you're like, oh, I want to make an Alaska, or I want to make, a last word or something like that. Then you add in those 1-2 ingredients instead of having to buy 13 different bottles all at once and never touching that one or two bottles that you have no other use for. Like creme de violette, very, very small occasions you're going to use more than a quarter of it or half an ounce. So using,
But I think that's something I did want to touch upon, though, is that a lot of those sort of less common liqueurs are things that you can DIY, especially if you're a little bit more experienced behind the bar. The opportunities for creating your own ingredients just are endless, truly endless. In fact, I think we attempted to make a creme de violette, if I'm not mistaken.
I don't know. I don't remember that, but it's got to be pretty easy. Yeah.
I'll find a link. I'm pretty sure. I want to say we did, but it was years ago, many years ago. Probably a lot less gray hair than both of us. Just saying. Whether it's that or it's something else, there's so many things that you can make yourself and save a whole ton of money, especially when it comes to liqueurs. Because liqueurs are, and I'm oversimplifying, of course, but liqueurs are basically spirit and syrup, right? And flavor, of course. We have quite a few posts on making your own liqueurs, but we're definitely not the last resource on the internet about that. If there's a liqueur in the world, there's probably somebody who's written a blog post on how to DIY it. And I know there's also some good resources around whether or not it's worth DIYing.
Right.
For example, things like orgeat is something that there's really two strong camps on whether it's worth making it yourself. But I would definitely do the research before you go and just automatically assume you have to buy it.
Yeah, and that's a really good point because to Julia's statement, liqueurs are basically just infused alcohol with water, kind of watered down to get that 20% proof. So
with sugar
and simple syrup, basically. So it's a great platform to start and experimenting and focusing on techniques, because when you start off, you could really focus on techniques and that'll make things a lot cheaper. As you become a bar manager, you rely heavily on technique to supplement the cost of the ingredients that are going in there. So it's usually a trade-off of that. So it's a great place to look at and great place to start. Highly, highly recommend developing your ability to do infusion, make liqueurs, syrups, and stuff like that. You're just going to be so much happier in the long run.
Definitely. Plus, it's fun. It's super fun, right? You make your own liqueur, you make your own infusion, then you make it in a cocktail and it's delicious. That's a great feeling.
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
if you're not sure you can DIY it, or you don't know where there's a great recipe, seriously, just go in the Craft Cocktail Club on Facebook. There are, 6,100 as of today, huge nerds in that group, and they're a heck of a lot smarter than us.
Yeah.
So ask them.
Yeah, and I think one of the last things to touch upon, that I didn't even think about this, but somebody brought this up for DIYing, and that is DIY garnishes. And I'm not talking about like oranges and lemons and limes. Of course, you can grow those in your garden, but they really recommended doing some really interesting things like herbs for sure. If you have a small area, you could do an herb garden. Edible flowers are a great choice for doing this kind of stuff, because you don't need a lot of area. You don't need a lot of space. You could do it in a pot, on your balcony.
Mint is a
like
weed,
that.
and we used to struggle a lot with mint because you would buy a bunch of it at the grocery store, use a quarter of it, and then by the time you get to your second cocktail, it's all wilted and gross. Right. If you've got it in the yard, you just pick it as you need it, and then it just kind of stays there. I will say we don't have the greenest thumb, so I will be the first to admit that not everybody is blessed with the ability to keep things alive. But one more garnish, though, to think about, and one more garnish that gets expensive fast, are cocktail cherries. Yeah,
and you did a post on DIY cocktail cherries a long time ago.
And I also did a post on, or I don't think it was me, I think somebody else wrote it, on comparing different brands of cocktail cherries.
Oh, right.
Because I know, I don't have any in front of me right now, but some of the really high-end cocktail cherries come with a really high-end price tag.
Yeah.
But according to the Craft Cocktail Club, once again, sensing a theme here, there are a lot of less expensive brands that are actually almost as good. So there are a lot of options. 5 years ago, I would not have been able to say this. I would have said, get Luxardo and period, stop, don't even look elsewhere. It's not like that anymore. There's a lot of options out there, and a lot of them are much less expensive. But if you do want to DIY it, there's a lot of great posts on the internet. I think we've got one of our own as well, which I'll include in the show notes.
Yeah, absolutely.
So another great way to save money when shopping for bar ingredients is to think carefully about the size that you are buying. I fully acknowledge that it's not normal to have this many different sizes of the
What do you
same
mean?
thing.
This is totally normal.
This is not normal.
So for anybody that's not looking on YouTube, we have probably about 6 or 7 bottles here of various sizes to kind of demonstrate what's available out there, and a new way of thinking about cocktails as far as like a economy of scale, I guess.
In both directions, though. I think a lot of people assume that if you're trying to save money with cocktails, you just need to save up your money and buy gigantic bottles. Au contraire. Sometimes you don't want to do that. And that's what we're going to talk about now. So in front of me, I have a gigantic Costco bottle of
Elijah Craig.
And it's totally, this is the normal size of bottle, which seems kind of tiny next to it. But as you can see, you can, if you're looking for an ingredient which is going to be a base spirit and you know you like it, by all means, go crazy, go to Costco. There's some really good deals there. And everybody, I mean, 5 or 6 people in the Craft Cocktail Club said Costco, Costco, Costco. It's a great place to get brand name stuff where you know exactly what you're going to get, and then you can just go ahead and keep buying the thing you know you already like. And if you don't want your friends to know that you buy your booze at Costco, I get it. Buy the normal size bottle, put it on your back bar, and hide this one.
That's exactly what I did.
And refill it.
Right.
Just saying, if you're not in a professional bar, you're allowed to do that.
Yeah,
if
absolutely.
you are in a professional bar, then no decanting. I don't think that's allowed.
Right. Well, and I think it's state by state, but not the point of this podcast.
Not going there.
So the other thing is, we're talking about, cost per ounce here. Obviously, economy of scale, you get more per ounce. So that's a really great way. But on the other side, one of the things we mentioned earlier was getting introduced into it and, deciding, okay, now I want to be able to make a Last Word or, one of these other cocktails. But you're kind of intimidated by a $60 bottle of chartreuse or a $70 bottle of chartreuse, depending on where you live. You can get a smaller size, get a 375 of something. So standard, I think retail shelf is a 750 milliliter. Half size is 375 milliliters. And then they have the little sample sizes. You get it like the Bevmo. There you go. Yep.
How do we
there
just
it
have
is,
this in front of
Screwball.
us? I made him buy this for me because I still haven't tried it.
Right.
I clearly still haven't tried it. But seriously, if you're looking at an ingredient, especially something that you're only going to use in very small amounts, why not just try it? But what would this cost?
Oh, I think that was like $4 or $5. And
exactly.
The price per ounce skyrockets when you go to small little bottles like this. But instead of investing a ton of money and not liking it, it's a lot cheaper. And you can also ask for little samples when bars are open again. If you're sitting around talking with a bartender and you're not quite sure if you're going to like the spirit, ask for a small sample. Most likely they have a good story. They're more than happy to share it with you. So it's another way.
Yeah. And if you're thinking to yourself, wow, I'm seeing lots of beautiful pictures of aviations. I don't know if I like that cocktail, but it's the only reason I would need to buy this one ingredient. Go to the bar and order one.
Right.
See if you like it before you commit to the entire bottle of liqueur.
Right.
I mean, that's obviously bars are good for lots of things, but that's one of the great things about them is that you can have a cocktail made really well and see if you like it and see if you want to invest in buying the ingredients yourself.
Yeah, so it kind of goes both ways, right? If you know you like it, get it big. Because you're going to go through it. And I would recommend getting one of the base spirits that you like the most. So if you're a bourbon person, pick out one really good bourbon that works well in cocktails and just go in on that one and get the 175s. Same thing with gin. If you're a tequila person, it might make sense to do that. But you don't need to get 175s of 5 different tequilas, for example. That's where you can get really fun and save up some money and get something really interesting at 750 and just enjoy it. But just like a well would be at a bar, have a little bit of a well developed in your bar program at home. It'll save you a lot of money.
Definitely. And I think you did hint about this, but I want to mention it once again, and that is for things that don't last. I'm really talking about vermouth here, let's be honest.
Right.
Don't buy a giant bottle unless you know you're going to get through it in time. I speak from experience, there is nothing sadder than dumping a mostly full or even half full bottle of vermouth.
Yeah.
It is so sad. It just falls in the sink looking at you with disappointment. It's the worst. Don't do that. Buy the little one or, post-COVID, invite some friends over, use it up. but just think in advance before you buy the bottle on how much you're actually going to get through, and store your vermouth in the fridge. Yeah,
if that's another takeaway. Always keep your vermouth in the fridge. It's a wine-based product. Keep it in the fridge. Keep it in the fridge. Keep it in the fridge.
You're going to hear this again. But yeah, size matters, and by that we mean if you're not sure you'll like it, buy small. If you are sure you'll like it, buy big, and then that will probably give you the best bang for your buck in terms of the least waste and the most yumminess per dollar. This next tip is kind of obvious, but we definitely have to say it, and that is, when possible, look for deals. I know locally we have Bevmo, and Bevmo has coupons, so yay, that's a good thing. I think another thing to look for is just sort of your regular mailers. We haven't had great luck with grocery stores here in California in terms of pricing. They generally are pretty high. Even if they have deals, they're usually not the best pricing. But what kind of stores would you look for? I mean, I know we're very California-centric here, but...
Well, I think... Actually, grocery stores that have, very specifically, I've had luck in one store chain, and I don't know if they're national, but Rayleigh's.
Okay.
So in the Bay Area, when we lived up there about a year ago, Rayleigh's always had a deal of buy 6, get 30% off. So that was always a great way to do it. And that usually dropped the price down pretty significantly. You didn't want to buy them one off. You didn't want to go in there and get one because they kind of absorb the price into the one bottle.
Yeah.
But if you were going to go in and stock up a little bit, it made a lot of sense to do it that way. I think there's other stores who are doing like 15% off and stuff like that. But, go to a bottle shop. If you're in the military, I think even the stores on base are pretty good as far as pricing goes.
Good to know.
Or if you have a buddy, that could be a good way of doing it.
I do. Am I remembering correctly that Bevmo also has like an industry discount?
Oh, I don't know about that. I'm not sure about that, but I know the bottle shop that we used to go to in San Francisco did. It gave you like 10 or 15% off.
It's worth asking, right?
Right?
Especially if it's a local, like smaller, non-chain shop.
Right.
It's definitely worth asking if they have any sort of industry discounts or, memberships or anything like that. But I think the next thing I wanted to hit upon is you don't need top shelf stuff for cocktails.
That's true.
Necessarily.
Yeah.
If you're going to be sipping your sort of scotch on the rocks, by all means, that's a great opportunity to go for the stuff you absolutely love, the stuff that's absolutely delicious on its own. But if you're going to be mixing it into, I don't know, a whiskey sour, Ramos Gin Fizz, all this sort of thing, you're not really going to taste the difference between a $20 bottle and a $50 bottle, and certainly not a $100 bottle. So I would say save that stuff for when it really matters and aim for the solid, well spirits.
Yeah, no, this is a really good idea. And, the more expensive stuff is always fun to mix with, and could be interesting doing a side-by-side comparison to see if it's actually worth it. And if it is to you, by all means, knock yourself out. But even when I was in a restaurant making recipes and cocktails, there's a price threshold I just didn't want to cross. If it was over $25 to $30 back in the day, it just didn't make a lot of sense for me to put it on a menu. So I kind of, when we build out this back bar, I have a kind of a similar approach of, I want to be able to use all the stuff in cocktails. So look at something a little bit more reasonable. You don't need to go crazy on really expensive stuff because, to Julia's point, it's just going to get covered up. And a lot of the nuance and a lot that makes that particular spirit special is going to get covered up with other things. So save the good stuff for when you're feeling celebratory.
Right, and it does depend on the cocktail a little bit. If you're just doing a G&T, then buy good tea. If it's a 2-ingredient cocktail and all you've got is gin and tonic, then you're probably going to want decent gin and decent tonic.
Right.
But if it's something that's got 14 things in it and it's only a quarter ounce of whatever it is, you may not really care if it's a super high-end spirit. So,
right.
And again, that kind of goes back to that cocktail cherry comment I made earlier. There's also just a lot of good stuff out there now.
There is.
It used to be that there used to be some spirits that you just had to spend a lot of money to get a good brand, and I can't think of any that are that way anymore. I mean, I think there's a lot of good choices in sort of your solid $20 to $25 price point, at least again local to us. And so you should not have any trouble finding a solid mixing spirit in that sort of price range. And again, there's no reason to go too much higher than that, in my opinion.
Right, and I think the one exception to that rule is brandies and cognacs. They are just traditionally very expensive. There are a couple brands out there that have kind of dropped the price down a lot over the years. I think the one Sacred Bond from Heaven Hill is a great brandy. It's a domestic brandy. And some of the Spanish brandies are really, really good. So to your point, kind of look outside of what is normally called for. So instead of cognac, look at the bigger category of like brandies and look around the world for really good brandies, because you'll end up finding stuff. And maybe even start going down the rum road, like finding some really good rums, because rums are, in my opinion, very undervalued as far as the spirit category. So you can have a lot of fun with rum, even now.
Well, I think you've made a really good point just now, and I think you were trying to, but substitution.
Yeah.
I think if something calls for cognac, then consider a brandy. Or consider a rum.
Right.
Right? I mean, I think the price points can be very different, and the ending cocktail, well, may certainly be different, but it might be better.
Right.
Right?
Exactly.
I mean, experimentation is kind of the best part, right?
That's kind of the heart of mixology, right? Of
It
like
really
being able to
is.
substitute ingredients. So that's a really good point. You know, if it calls for X, try Y. It might be better.
Right. What I think is also when you go down the road of things like amars and liqueurs as well, if the recipe calls for Coach Americano and you don't have it, but you have something similar, you don't necessarily need to go run and buy a bottle. Like, be willing to play.
Yeah.
Right? And I think as you spend a little bit more time in this hobby and sort of get used to the ingredients you have and the ingredients out there in the market, you'll get more and more familiar with what you can and can't substitute. I will personally tell you right now that this is one of the things that just takes kind of time and learning. However, again, you could totally ask a community like the Craft Cocktail Club, and they would be very happy to nerd out with you on what you could substitute if you find a cocktail that you just don't have a component of.
Yeah, and the last little piece I'm going to touch on with kind of buying spirits and stuff like that is seasonality. And not talking about like in the summer, fruit is abundant. No, I'm talking about like when it's a holiday, people like to drink. So when it's a holiday, like New Year's right now, just past us, there's some really fantastic deals. And usually the cheapest deals of the year happen around major holidays like 4th of July, St. Patrick's Day. You know, these infamous drinking holidays, Cinco de Mayo, are fantastic opportunities to stock up your bar. Look for really aggressive deals around then, and consider trying to take as big of an advantage of it as you possibly
That's
can.
a really good point. Yeah, I remember we would always stock up on bubbly.
Yeah.
Right at New Year's.
Yep.
The best deals on bubbly are right before the New Year's celebration. Sorry, we just missed it for you. Next year, that's definitely the best time to stock up on bubbly, and likewise for the rest of the holidays too. Keep an eye on those mailers.
Yep.
They do sometimes have really good deals.
Absolutely. So another area to really think about to kind of minimize costs when it comes to a very expensive hobby is preserving the ingredients that you do have, taking good care of the stuff that would otherwise go bad. So basically storage and upkeep.
So we kind of hinted at this earlier with my sad vermouth story, but yes, there's the best way to waste money is to waste product.
Yeah.
By not storing it well. So a couple tips here. I'm going to just start, of course, with vermouth. Store your vermouth in the fridge. Store your vermouth in the fridge. Put it in the fridge. And again, buy smaller bottles so that you don't waste it.
Right.
It does not last very long. How long would you say vermouth lasts?
It depends. People say within a month, but I've had it for like even up to 6 months, and it's still very drinkable. In a cocktail, you're probably not even going to notice it. But
Depends
I wouldn't
on the
hold on
cocktail.
to it for a long time past that either.
Right, and definitely, try not to hold it for too long. But in addition to that, other silly stuff. Seal your bottles.
Yep.
Make sure they're really tightly sealed before you lay them on the side in the fridge. That is also a sad story I'm not going to bring up right now.
Oh, yeah. No, I've had to clean out many a fridge because of a silly mistake like that. But yeah, that's a good point. Just make sure that everything's sealed up. There's been times where I've done a video or, made a cocktail for Instagram or something like that, and I walked away and I come back the next day and I left the lid open on something. I can't even remember what it was. And I'm like, well,
it's so easy to do.
That stinks, So, just take care of the products you have. I think that's a really good point.
Yeah.
One of the other things I was going to bring up, especially with a vermouth conversation, is if you do buy a bigger bottle of vermouth, maybe even put them in smaller bottles and putting those in the fridge. So that way you're only oxidizing a little bit at a time versus the whole batch.
That's a really good idea.
Yeah, so that with another topic is gas systems. So if you get a bottle of vermouth, you can open it, use it, and put some of that argon gas in it. This is something we used to do in the restaurants for wine programs. But that should help kind of keep your vermouth fresh. But if you were to split them, get like 3 half bottles or 3 small bottles, and put argon on it and only use one at a time,
they're going to last a real long time.
Yeah, you're going to be able to hold that product a lot longer.
What about those
anything.
like gimmicky vacuum seal things you see on Amazon?
I think they work.
$6.
I haven't done like any scientific study for it, but on an anecdotal level, I think it works fine.
It's probably better than nothing.
It's probably better than nothing. Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
So yeah, it could be worth trying that too.
There's one more thing I think is really important.
What's that?
When it comes to storage, and that is, I'm not completely kidding here. Hide the good stuff. If you have really good quality stuff, make sure that the people around you understand that it's good quality stuff.
Right. This is a good point.
I mean, we have already crossed this bridge in our relationship.
Yep.
I already know what things are untouchables. But I saw a TikTok recently where a gentleman was walking into the kitchen to show a video of his wife mixing up some delicious whiskey brownies. And he asked her what she used. And she said, oh, well, there was this one bottle in the back that only had a little bit left. And she pulls out this bottle of Pappy. And she had thrown them in the brownie batter.
Oh, no.
I'm like crying. I'm like, oh, my God.
Oh, no.
Now, stage or not, sure. But you see the point, right? Like if you have teenagers in the house and you don't trust them.
Lock and key.
Right?
Yeah.
Exactly. Or prank them, right? Even better. So much you could do there. But that's a different episode. But seriously, like if your friends are coming over and they're not craft cocktail people and you think they're just gonna like rummage through your back bar, just make sure either people know what not to touch and you trust them, or hide it.
Yeah.
I'm not completely kidding here because that is just heartbreaking. Especially if you've saved something really nice for a special occasion or just because it is really nice and really expensive. That's pretty bummer.
Yeah, exactly. If everybody's screaming shots, 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 and you're like, oh my God, no, not the Pappy or whatever else,
Yeah.
Definitely evaluate that situation for sure.
It's worth thinking about. Maybe you don't have this problem, great and wonderful, but it's like an insurance policy, right?
Right.
Just something to be careful about.
Right, especially if you have teenagers. I think that's a really good point.
We got a long time until we're worried about that, but let's just say there's a reason this whole bar is under lock and key.
Well, and I think also I remember going to parties in high school, and this happened where you start drinking and you got like 50 people at your house, and all of a sudden you can't control the situation. I went to a friend's party, and in the back, the parent thought they did a really good job of hiding it. Above the fridge, that awkward cabinet you can never get to.
Oh, everybody knows.
All the way in the back was a completely sealed, like tax stamped, sealed bottle of whiskey that had been there for probably 20 years, and it was gone.
Oh.
They 18-year-olds raided it and
I will say, everybody knows you put the stuff you're hiding above the fridge. So, that's where we put the Halloween candy, right? So don't use that hiding place. Everybody knows that.
Right.
But also, that's heartbreaking.
Yeah, it was.
Somebody got in trouble.
And this was well before I ever got introduced into the glories that is Mixology or anything like that. But even then, I was like, that's not cool, man.
Yeah.
Not cool.
So choose your hiding places wisely. So we're going to round out this episode with one final tip. And this one actually does come straight from the Craft Cocktail Club. And I love it because it reminds me of an earlier time when people could see other people.
Oh, man. I miss those days.
I know. Someday, theoretically, that'll happen again. But there were some ideas in the group around sharing. Mm-hmm. Why not, right? And I love this. There's a couple different ideas here. First of all, if you know any makers, distillers, brewers, liqueur makers, things like that, why not trade, right? It only costs you the cost of goods and vice versa, right? So make friends with other makers in your area. I think that's a great idea. Just in general, it's good to know the other folks doing similar stuff. Mm-hmm. So I love that one.
Yeah. And I think one of the other things that came up, and by all means, I'm not advocating this, but if you have friends that are craft cocktail nerds as well, and you guys get together and, you throw parties and stuff like that, you can set up an exchange program, So if one person goes buys a bottle of green chartreuse and the other person buys the yellow bottle of green, or yellow chartreuse, you could split those.
Yeah.
Theoretically.
You could, I mean, if it's a private party
Right.
and there's no money changing hands, I think it's all
I would assume
completely
it'd be
above board,
totally
right?
fine. Yeah, exactly.
I will say a huge caveat here, and that is, do not post about this on Facebook.
Period. Do not do it.
It's really, really important because Facebook's terms of service are very, very, very strict about this. For example, do not post about offering exchanges, asking for exchanges, any sort of a trade, God forbid, any sort of a money for alcohol in a Facebook group. If you do so, it is possible the entire group will be irrevocably deleted.
Yeah.
I'm not kidding. We've
I've
had
been
friends.
part of a couple of those groups.
And they're gone forever.
Right.
It's like devastating.
Yeah.
So if you post anything like this in the Craft Cocktail Club, we will ask you to leave immediately.
Right.
Because
true.
we don't want to get deleted. So be really careful about this. I know I'm making it sound like smoke and mirrors, but it's a thing. But exchanging spirits, I mean, in real life, I don't see why not. I think it's a great idea. If you know other craft cocktail enthusiasts in your area, post-COVID, get to know them.
Right.
Offer this in person, have those conversations, text messages. As far as I know, that's allowed. I feel very like
lawyerly
sneaky
here.
about
Yeah,
this.
exactly.
I know. But it is something I don't see why not, frankly. Maybe you do want to buy the can of Luxardo cherries. It's like this big and it's like $120.
Split it 3 ways.
Why not?
Yeah,
right?
exactly.
I'm all about it. I think it's great. I'm all about collaboration and sharing, but do be a little bit careful because you definitely don't want to end up, getting in trouble with the Facebook powers that be.
Right. Or I remember in San Francisco, there were a couple of bars around the area that each one bought their own barrel or many barrels of bourbon. And they would get their own private label. So I did this for the place I worked at called Wayfair Tavern, and we had our own barrel that we chose, and it was really cool because it was our bourbon. It was different from everything else out there. A restaurant down the street had one, another one across the town had one, and one of the things that I saw was people were exchanging them. So they would have at Wingtip, you would be able to taste 3 different single barrel bourbons from 3 different places around the city.
Pretty cool.
And they set up this really cool exchange program.
I have no idea how that works from a regulatory perspective,
Me neither.
so definitely find out.
Right, exactly.
Especially if you're running a bar or a restaurant where you have a liquor license, be super duper careful about that.
Right.
But I'm all for it, right?
Right.
If you can find a way to do it legally, I think this is great. The more that we can share, we can take advantage of larger bottles, all that stuff. I love it. I think it's really great. I think sharing is an awesome way to sort of spread the load and also try a lot more stuff.
Yeah, and I think one of the last little things I'm going to touch on here, part of craft cocktails is really developing your palate and trying as much as you possibly can and what's available out in the world of spirits. There are a ton of events out there, consumer-facing and industry-facing, that welcome people with open arms and are trying desperately to get you to taste their product. So if that is something you're interested in, definitely go check out, your Bevmos, or sometimes they do pourings there.
Yeah.
If you're part of the USBG, you're not going to be, this is not unfamiliar to you. This is a normal thing. So
what
finding
about conferences?
Absolutely.
I don't know what's going to be happening this year, but Tales the Cocktail, San Antonio Cocktail Conference, I think, SACC, I think. Portland, there's a whole bunch of these. Some of them are more focused on industry, but a lot of them are consumer focused. Right. And they have these amazing banquet halls with tables and tables and tables, and every single brand desperately wants you to taste their product.
Right.
Doesn't that sound wonderful?
Yeah, exactly.
And then you can find out if you like it, and you can even support the producer right there by purchasing a bottle typically. And sometimes they'll give you things like cool shirts.
Yep.
Just saying.
Swag. Lots of swag.
It's true. But that's a great way to taste stuff as well, in a world where conferences exist again, which will hopefully be soon.
Yeah. So that pretty much wraps up this episode. Hopefully this gives everyone a couple of really good ideas. I know I learned a bunch of creative ideas about saving money around cocktails.
Definitely. We will include a link in the show notes.
Look
at this. Do you see those special effects?
For anybody listening on a podcast or through your headphones, she's holding up a sign that says the show notes so we don't have to remember about it at the end and get super awkward and be like, what number was it again? Oh,
I know. We made a sign.
Yep.
Mixologytalk.com/188.
See? We didn't even know. We had to look.
That's where you'll find the show notes for this episode. We will have a link to that post in the Craft Cocktail Club, so you can not only see what everybody else said, but you can add your own ideas as well. We'll have links to all of the things that we mentioned in this episode as well. And of course, we'll have a link to the Craft Cocktail Club too, so you can join and be a nerd with us.
That's right. Come over, harass us, tell us a great joke. But yeah, definitely go check out the show notes over at mixologytalk.com/188.
And whatever you do not try to sell your booze on the Craft Cocktail
Don't
Club.
do it. Don't do it. Don't do it.
We'll see you there.
Yep. Cheers, everyone. So this is episode number 100. Here we go.
I hit myself in the face with it.
Oh no! Hey everybody.
Stumbled up in here.
Ready? So that pretty much wraps up this episode.
I have to scratch my nose. I'm sorry.
That was it. I was done.